Good morning. Thank you for coming. My name is Dave Mayer. I'll be your moderator today. We're here to talk about mental health and wellness in the startup realm. A couple quick things. We are recording today. We are going to be fairly brutally honest up here on stage in terms of what we've been through. We certainly welcome you to do the same. Certainly no requirement, just a heads up that we are recording today. And if you wouldn't mind putting your cell phones on vibrate, please. And Mr. Wrigler, are you here? No? That's all right. What I was hoping to do was just take a quick moment, 10 seconds, just to be grounded, be present, be focused, and we'll get started. All right. Thank you for coming. So, I believe that mentally healthy entrepreneurs are an incredibly core element of innovation. Obviously, this is a large-scale issue, with entrepreneurs and small businesses creating more than 65% of new businesses and new jobs in America every year. Who am I? I am a serial entrepreneur since 1998. I've started 4 businesses, running my current business, Technical Integrity, focused on the startup realm for the past 6 years. I had the bright idea 6 years ago to start 2 businesses at once, and I ended up in the hospital from exhaustion. I don't recommend it. Also had a massive falling out with a co-founder, and I was so stressed about the falling out, I didn't want to go places that I would normally go in public because I might run into him. Generally, I'm a stress mess, and I'm doing my best to come back from that, to find healthy outlets. I've turned to alcohol unsuccessfully. The generalities of the level of stress I have in my life at any given time scares the hell out of me and my wife, in that my father has had 3 heart attacks, my grandfather and my grandmother died from heart attacks, so this is real for me. Let's see. The only thing that I have found that works for me is to be completely immersed in an activity. This idea came from your brother Daniel, and I find that snowboarding is the only thing that works for me, that I can turn off my racing mind. I'm doing my best to find other outlets. In general, I'm super passionate about helping others and building immersive programs in Aspen, where I live now, focused on helping build happier, healthier entrepreneurs. My hope is that this panel can reduce the stigma of mental health issues and open some minds and give some tools to those that need them. So with that, I will stop talking and ask each of our esteemed panelists to introduce themselves and explain a little bit as to why this issue is important to you.
Great. Nothing like kicking off with the super intimidating colleagues here on this panel. I'm Sarah. I'm Sarah Jane Coffey. I have 1 piece of bad news, 2 pieces of good news. The bad news is I am not Jerry Colonna. He unfortunately was unable to be here today and asked if I would take a seat. And that's something that we do at Reboot. We help people find their seat and take it. So when the boss asks, I listen, right? So the good news is that even though Jerry is not here, we just recorded the 40th episode of the Reboot podcast, which you can find on our website, reboot.io/podcast. On the podcast, Jerry interviews entrepreneurs about the emotional ups and downs of entrepreneurship. And so I'm 99% sure that anything that he would have said today has been said somewhere in that 40 hours of recording. So if you go home and you listen to that, you won't have missed anything. The other piece of good news is that I do not have a podcast, and so anything I say is completely proprietary and new to you. Aren't you lucky? So the reason that I'm up here is because I'm not a founder. I have not started a company, but I have been in startups for a little over 6 years. I was super excited and drawn in by the Boulder startup scene and all the excitement, and I used to watch the founders at my crappy job and be like, oh my gosh, I need to be there. And so I came here, I moved here. I showed up at a BOCC. I said, hey, I'm Sarah Jane, I'm new to town. I want to work for a proprietary tech startup and be a community manager. And I'm like, a year of this, I will find my spot. 2 weeks later, I was in an interview. 2 weeks after that, I was hired at my first startup. And it was fucking hard. Really, really fucking hard. And I can say fuck because Brad is up here. And we are just going to go toe-to-toe with this because I am a prolific swearer. Attribute. Through the hiring process, I didn't ask a lot of questions. I just thought, this is it. I have found my spot. I'm going to be able to work at this job. I'm going to find meaning in my life. I'm going to self-actualize. Yes, these things are fucked up as I say them now. I recognize this. And so I brought a lot of my mental baggage to the situation. And the situation was a bucket of gasoline. And there was some very dysfunctional and inexperienced leadership. It was a very high-pressure company. And it exploded. And the way that it exploded is that I started to feel like I was a piece of shit. And the reason that I was upset at that job was because there was something wrong with me. If I was a better human being, if I was smarter, if I was thinner or better looking or any of these bullshit stories that I tell myself, then, I'd be happy and I'd be successful. And so some things happened, and I kept stuffing it down inside of me, and I kept stuffing it down inside of me, and it became too much. And, I was crying in the bathroom 2 to 3 times a week. Then I was crying in the office softly, in our open office, behind a laptop, I'm just looking for something in my bag. And then I was going home and crying. I completely and totally melted down. The end came because one night I freaked out. I've never had anxiety attacks. I'm not an anxiety person. I'm a depression person. Hello, my people. But it was 3 a.m, and I was checking my phone. I wasn't even expecting an email. I was just completely convinced that something was coming, and if I did not answer this email that was coming, I was going to get fired. And if I got fired, that would be the end of the world, because I would have come here to work and do this and be successful in startups and be successful in the startup scene. And if I didn't do that, then I was going to be a complete and total failure. I was so afraid. And so I'm pacing around the room. My husband is like, what the fuck are you doing? He wasn't my husband at this time, and he actually married me after this. God bless him. He's right here. He's a good man. And he was like, you need to get some help. So the next day I went to the doctor. She prescribed me some anxiety medication. She prescribed me some antidepressants. Not everybody needs pharmaceuticals. I did. Thank God. Science. I took that anxiety medication, and within 25 minutes, my head came up from underwater, I didn't even know I was drowning, you know? And I looked around and I was like, fuck this. And I went to work and I quit. That was well timed. You are my people. And I went to a therapist. I thought that, it was going to be months before I felt like myself again. It was weeks. And I have continued on. Not everything has been perfect since then. Life, in my experience, is up and down. It's ebbs and flows. It waves. But I am a much steadier person. So where I am today is through some other experiences and a beautiful dose of serendipity. I get the honor to work with the people at Reboots. And I just want to say we have a mantra, and I feel like I'm going on forever. I'm so sorry. What that is that we believe that work does not have to destroy us. We believe that work holds the potential of the full human self. That's what I found. Good places exist. Healthy places exist. I'm a better, more whole person because of the work that I do today. I'm going to shut up now.
Yeah. All right, I think we're done.
So I really can't follow that, you know that. So my name's Tom Higley, and I don't have a story that's even close to that. I have a different story and a different set of experiences over a long period of time because I'm old. So I'll go back a little bit and sort of connect you to me and my experience and how I maybe came to be here. And I don't know why I'm here exactly, but I know how I came to be here. I can say that. So I'm the kid who barely graduated from high school, didn't go my senior year. I had an English teacher who was kind enough to persuade the principal to let me graduate. It's the same English teacher I stayed with when I ran away from home. He was an amazing, amazing guy. I had some powerful experiences in life at that point, but mostly it was pretty shitty. I became a musician. I'm the only person on the stage that played with the DeBarge family and opened for Barry White and the Love Unlimited Orchestra, I'm pretty sure. Probably.
Tom knew about drugs before drugs were cool.
That's funny, but it's partly true. So I played the Chitlin circuit. I had this bizarre experience of different cultures because the band that I joined at 17 or 18 turned out to have 5 black singers who were like the Temptations. And they scooped me up, and pretty soon the white musicians quit except me. And I became the guy to hire other musicians and engage, and I'm on the other side of the tracks and living in the black community and learning to speak differently and think differently. There's a parallel between this and startups, by the way. We're going to get to that in a quick second. So that was early life, was life as a musician. I did that for 5 or 6 years, and then I went through this period where I waited tables, I painted houses, I worked on the line at a Fisher body plant in gray coveralls with a hose, and the hose that you'd grab had a number associated with it, and when you saw the Oldsmobile come down the line with the number on it, you would grab the right number and you'd slap that thing into your gun and you'd spray out the old paint and spray the new stuff so that this gray looking thing that came through was suddenly purple or blue or white or whatever. And this space had solvent running underneath, and everything was frickin' gray. I mean, deadly gray, and it was noisy. This is a factory, right? It's making a ton of noise. That should have been the most depressing and worst time of my life. Oddly, really, really oddly, I would, and remember it's loud, people have masks, they're spraying stuff. Oddly, I'm singing, I'm writing music, and people can't hear it, which is good, but it's an awesome thing. I'm just having a great friggin' time, and you shouldn't be. And sometimes, sometimes with solvent running underneath you and grab really dry as fuck walls, and just the most dystopian situation and circumstance you can imagine, sometimes in that situation, you can be just as high and as happy as fuck, even without the drugs. And I've experienced that. So that's a powerful thing. Fast forward a little bit, I end up going to college. It took me 10 years to get to an undergrad institution, and then I went to law school after that. And I came out to Colorado after law school to practice. I started at Holland and Hart, and then decided that the commute from Fort Collins to Denver was disastrous. I already had a wife and 2 kids. That was just ridiculous. So I started to practice in Fort Collins instead. And one day, somebody came up to me and said, Tom, we need a community computer network in Fort Collins. We're not sure what that is, but we're sure we need one. And we think you could help. So we created this thing called FortNet, which was this first ISP in Fort Collins, and it was the most amazing, most extraordinary experience of my life to date. So here I am. I'm a community organizer, and there's a technical guy, and there's a business guy, and then there's a whole cast of characters, like all of us, and we built this thing. It was stunning. And like the lawyer that I was at the time, not an entrepreneur, I created a nonprofit corporation with a for-profit subsidiary that passed its profits up to the nonprofit. And I had great fun. So I decided this lawyer stuff, I got to get rid of this. I'm going to do a startup. And I did a thing called Net Delivery, and had a whole bunch of wonderful experiences and really, really awful experiences. I remember a board meeting. Brad wasn't in this company other than as an advisor at one point, and he wasn't on the board. So what I'm going to say doesn't implicate him. You should understand this. And Brad and I met, by the way, through Net Delivery in a way that was really kind of odd. So I'm raising capital at Highland Capital Partners in Boston for this thing. And they say, we love this thing. This is really interesting. We'd like to be in it, but we'd have to have somebody in Colorado we trust. And there's this guy that's just moved to Colorado. His name is Brad Feld. Do you know him? I didn't. So they made the introduction. That's how we met. And then he drove up from Boulder to Fort Collins, and you did what?
I had a car accident.
You had a car accident.
I didn't really understand that when you were driving your car on this stuff called ice, that when you pressed on the brake, the car didn't stop.
Do you understand it now?
Not really.
Yes.
I just don't drive that much anymore.
Where did you go to school, Brad? I was just curious.
I went to school in Boston, but I didn't have a car in Boston. I drove in Texas, so I never drove on ice till I came out here.
So that was our first meeting. He came up, he looked at things, he invited me down. We got to know each other in that context, but Brad wasn't really directly involved. My experience, and this ties again into what we're talking about today, my experience was that at a lovely board meeting with a venture capitalist, I had a guy look at me across the table, and he was like Khrushchev. You're not old enough to remember who that is, but Khrushchev is known to have taken his shoe off and slammed it on the table. Well, this guy was Khrushchev, and he said, Higley, I know what you're trying to do. The last time somebody tried to do this to me, I took their motherfucking house. So you guys threatened to take my house.
Friendly.
So the point to this is that there can be in these situations a kind of abusive character. It does happen, and it comes from different places. It can come from your sources of capital. It can come from your leadership in the organization. It can come from just the anxiety that people feel in those situations, and they're sometimes not very experienced yet. Sometimes they're really experienced and they're still anxious and having great struggles. And sometimes that anxiety or insecurity gets weaponized. And you can be the one that's doing the weaponizing, or you can be on the receiving end of what that is, and then have to figure out how you're going to process that and deal with it. And I'm quite sure that I've both been a recipient of that and a deliverer of that in different circumstances over a long period of time. Because over the course of time, and then I'm going to shut up and pass this, over the course of time, and I did this last night in a different context, I've started 7 or 8 companies or things over a period of time, things that I've been a founder of and CEO. And I will tell you that a lot of these things are fucking failures. I mean, they didn't succeed, and some were wonderful and extraordinary and great experiences. And I would have been hard pressed to tell you in advance that the thing that I did was going to be shit, or the thing that I did was going to be just over the moon. And Brad would have been hard pressed probably too at the time for some of these things. But that experience over a period of time has given me the benefit of actually seeing amazing numbers of teams in different contexts. And I'm grateful to Brad and David Cohn for being a mentor in the Techstars program, has given me visibility again into a whole bunch of situations. So I can resonate with the experience that you share and know that it's out there. I don't have great answers, but I have some perspectives. So,
Can I say something really quickly?
Please.
I just want to acknowledge that as someone, well, we all have suffering, right? And Jerry and Parker Palmer, who's one of our teachers at Reboot, that teaches us, talk about when we carry suffering and we don't own our suffering, it becomes violence. It's violence that manifests in me, and then it's violence that extends to everyone around me. And if I don't own my violence, I'm just going to perpetuate the cycle. And as someone who has been deeply hurt by a leader who is in a cycle of violence, hearing you own that and acknowledge that is extremely powerful to me, and I really appreciate it.
I'm going to introduce myself with a story with a little context around it. But before I do that, I want to toss out a phrase that's one of my favorites. For those of you that are fans of Atlas Shrugged, you'll recognize the line. If you're not, you don't have to be a fan of Atlas Shrugged to appreciate the line. John Galt, who's one of the protagonists in the book, somewhere deep in the 1,200 pages that's the book, says the following: "It's not that I don't suffer, but that I know the unimportance of suffering." And I carry that around all the time. It's reflective. It's not the same statement you made, but it's reflective of that statement. And Jerry and I, who have been really close, Jerry Colonna and I have been friends since the mid-'90s. We talk regularly about the notion of attachment, detachment, and non-attachment. And I'm much, much, much more interested in non-attachment than detachment, because I'm going to do a bunch of stupid shit, and I'm going to hurt people, and I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm going to get hurt. And we're humans. We're, as I like to say over and over again, we're just big bags of chemicals. And sometimes our chemicals mix in weird ways, and sometimes they mix in not weird ways that cause weird behavior. But to be able to have non-attachment to it and try to always be better as a result versus to try to prevent it from happening is powerful, and I think that's what I heard. So I'm not as old as Tom, but I'm 50. And I'm going to introduce myself by talking about an experience in my mid-20s that was formidable for me. So I was a founder of a company when I was 19. I had a partner join me when I was 21. So we think about the founding of the company really when I was 21. It was a company that was extremely creatively named. It was called Feld Technologies. Rule number 723 of a company of entrepreneurship is do not name the company after you, because when people have problems, they call for Mr. Feld if the company is called Feld Technologies. And if somebody wants to sell you some shit that you don't want, they call for Mr. Feld. So that was a mistake. And we built my partner Dave Jilk and I built a self-funded company. We never raised any money. It was successful. Eventually, our tagline became "We suck less." We were a custom software company, and our job was to suck less than the previous consultants that had been hired by the company that had fired them because the software hadn't worked, and now they hired us to come solve the problem. And we would try to explain to them that the fact that they had no money because they'd spent it on the people before us that sucked was not our problem. That was not something we could solve for, but we could build them software that worked. In the middle of the growth of this company, I was also a PhD student at MIT, where I'd been an undergrad and master's student, and I just continued on. And I had also married a woman who was my high school girlfriend, who we dated in high school and then had a long-distance relationship in college, and then immediately after graduating, got married. And I woke up one day, and I'm not going to talk about the sequence to it, but I'm going to tell you the waking up one day to the confluence of the three events that were happening at the same time in my life now. I had been kicked out of the PhD program. MIT likes to say I was on a leave of absence, that I can come back anytime I want, but I prefer to think of it as being kicked out. I was a very bad PhD student. I was a good entrepreneur, but not an effective PhD student. I was in the midst of getting a divorce from a woman who had had an affair for a year. And like many of those things, I was the last to know. And it wasn't something that I blame on her either, because it was both of us. She clearly wasn't getting from the relationship what she wanted to get from the relationship. And that had to do with my dynamics and work and being a founder and, working 120 hours a week, and having work be the thing that was the thing. And I was unbelievably bored with my work. So these three things were happening at the same time. And the boredom was not because the work was fundamentally boring, but that it was the same work over and over again. And we had about a 20-person company. We were making a couple $1 million a year. We were profitable. I had money. I didn't have the external stress of. We had months where we worried about making payroll, but we didn't have investors that we had to deal with that were going to take our house. But we struggled. But generally we did fine. But I was bored. So I had this confluence of these three factors in my mid-20s, and the end result was it triggered a 2-year depressive episode that was a very deep, significant depressive episode. The couple of things I'll say about it, and then I think we should do where we want to go on post-introductions, is, or finish the panel, since I guess we'll have talked for the time of the panel. We can just go straight to Q&A. The dynamics that happened during this period of time was I was very fortunate in that I called her for a while. I called her my current wife to keep her on notice, Amy. Now I call her my last wife, or the last wife I'll have, because it's just too much effort at 50 to think about trying to be in another relationship. Amy and I had started dating, and fortunately, in this period where I became incredibly depressed, she was able to be very supportive, not of, I have a broken toy, I'm going to fix my broken toy, but recognizing she'd known me for many years also because we've been in college together, this idea of, hey, there are some things you can do that might be helpful, which my parents couldn't really help me with because they didn't relate to it or understand it, and I was ashamed and afraid to talk to anybody about it, to show weakness, and I couldn't really be, I'm a CEO of a company, like I wasn't going to talk to my employees about it. Maybe I could talk to my partner about it. And I was fortunate, and my partner Dave and my wife Amy were both very, very helpful. And I did therapy. I was incredibly ashamed that I was in therapy. I took medication, unbelievably ashamed that I took medication. At this point, probably the only people on the planet that don't know I took medication are my parents, so please don't tell them. And if you could do an IP thing, if my dad's watching this video, no, hi, Dad. I didn't think it would be helpful, so we just never really talked about it. But I went through this period in a very formidable point in my life. You know, when you're in your 20s, you either have separated from your parents and resolved, or you hadn't, and I hadn't. So on top of everything else, part of the recognition of all of these things over this period of time was that. That experience, that 2-year experience, that was this depressive episode, which ended, lifted at some point. I've had several since. I've talked very publicly about them, was extraordinarily impactful on how I thought about what life was and how I related to it. And I didn't figure it out at all, but it completely changed my orientation towards it and my capacity to think about it from, you know, about age 27, 28 when I came out of this depressive episode to today.
Thank you. So we have one more introduction. Is my co-organizer, Kevin Iwaki, has a poignant story I'd like him to share.
Hello. Hi, everyone. So I'm Kevin Iwaki. I am a software engineer around Boulder, a Techstars alumni, and I'm organizing the Future of Tech Track this year, which is just events on machine learning, cryptocurrency, augmented reality, virtual reality, things like that. This is my first time working with Dave. This time is my first time working on an event that's a little bit more touchy-feely and less about like the programming side of things. So it's sort of pushing my comfort zone, but I'm really glad that we're doing it. I have 2 reasons why I wanted to do this event. Ever since I was 18, I've sort of been interested in mind hacking and figuring out how I can minimize or manage my own suffering. And my process for doing that is through Zazen. It's a Buddhist thing, which is just like focusing on your breath and letting thoughts pass. So that's sort of been where I was the path I was on in terms of mental health until December of 2014, when my little brother David committed suicide via a gunshot wound to the head. So as you can imagine, that was sort of like a really tough moment for my parents and for my family. And I didn't really know until that time how much of an issue suicide is in America. I mean, there's 40,000 people in America that commit suicide, and 1 million every year. So these are yearly statistics. 1 million every year that attempt it, which is just like, that number's huge. That means that 2 people have attempted suicide in America since I started talking here. So I just think that that's a lot of people. I am super thankful for the Boulder community is so open and inclusive in talking about mental health issues, because I think that the only way that that we're going to prevent future suicides is by increasing awareness and increasing the number of people that know how to help someone who is suicidal. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. So we will definitely get to your questions, so please start preparing those. That was, we fully intend to spend a good deal of time on that. I want to talk briefly about stigma and why there is a stigma. I'm candidly not clear, but I'd love for each of you guys to talk about why there's a stigma, how we can potentially get rid of it, and in particular, Brad, maybe we can start with you. You mentioned that there's a fallacy that leaders are flawless and that they can't show vulnerability and weakness. Is that part of the the stigma?
Yeah, it's part of the stigma. There's an archetype, especially in the United States, and it subsequently then translates into Europe and lots of other parts of the world, around the notion of what a leader is and the characteristic of a leader. And it's reinforced by long cultural norms that I think in 2016 we are now, as a society, transcending and changing meaningfully. But if you go back 50 years and you don't have to work very hard at it. You can watch stuff on the web. If you don't want to watch stuff on the web, just watch Mad Men. That'll get you close enough to it. Or read some books from that time period, and you realize just how much progress we've made from the 1950s and the 1960s in terms of societal norms around gender, around race, around ethnicity. But that sort of characteristic of what a leader is and a strong leader, and the sort of shell around that leader is something that we're still struggling with. One of the things that has been profound in that process is a number of people who, as leaders, have been very successful leaders who had non-traditional characteristics. And some of that, would be gender and ethnicity, but some of that was style and personality and approach to work. And there's a wonderful book that a woman named Susan Cain wrote called Quiet. It's about 5, 6, 7 years old. And it's essentially, ostensibly about introverts and the idea of what an introvert is and how to think about an introvert. But there's a section buried in there, it's about 2/3 of the way through the book, that's about 30 or 40 pages on leadership. And it brings home this notion that as a society, we've created this archetype of a leader that's completely fucked up. And what she brings forward as examples is the number of different ways that people can be effective leaders without being the extrovert, good-looking, always correct, ... personality. So I think much of it is cultural norms, and I think that leads to the stigma, is that there is a stigma associated with things that if you go back long enough, that stigma used to be, ethnicity and race was stigmatized in the United States. If you pay attention to the lunatics that are advocating for Donald Trump, you see that it's not a problem that we've solved yet. Probably never solve it as a species, but we can overcome it in terms of lots of vectors of this, and one of them is leadership. The last is that I think there are generational norms, and here that change. And here would be an example that has nothing to do with stigma and mental health, but has to do with a very easy trajectory through time. So my parents are in their 70s, and they are socially accepting and liberal, but they still struggle with homosexuality. They're not, opposed to it, but they still struggle with it. It's not natural to them. I'm in my 50s, and I'm very comfortable with it. I think people here that are in their 30s and 40s and 50s very comfortable with it. But I'm incredibly uncomfortable, although I'm very tolerant of transgender and gender identity. So I would say that my parents' generation struggles with homosexuality. My generation struggles with gender identity. The generation that's in their 15 to 25 or 30, gender identity is a natural part now of that discussion. And in fact, part of the discussion is that gender identity is something that you need to get comfortable with at a much younger age. Those are things over time that are societal norms that shift. And I think that stigma associated with mental health and the dynamics around leadership is like that, where we're in a zone where strong leaders are finally talking about it. We have people that have dedicated their professional lives, like the folks at Reboot, to bringing it out as a central theme and not just sort of tossing it up there, but continuing to drive over and over again about this. And by the way, as a cultural norm, if you were at Techstars demo day last night, right? One of the companies is about mindfulness, and it's a dating site for people who are mindful. and this notion of mindfulness. And if you said that to my parents, right? Hey, there's a dating site for mindful people. The first thing they'd say is, what's a dating site? But they probably, there's the dating sites, those are the places where you get laid, right? That's what my dad would probably say. Sorry, Dad. And I say, no, it's like J-date. It's like, for Jewish people. And he said, oh, yeah, I heard of J-date. I had a kid, right? So like the shift of, well, mindfulness, what's mindfulness in that context? Right, so we're through those sorts of generational evolutions, and stigma and mental health and the notion of that in leadership is one of them.
Thanks.
So I just wanted to say on the idea of expectations of leadership and these ideas that we have. In my situation, I was looking to work to fulfill me. And as a part of that, I looked to the leader of this company to fulfill me, to validate me as a human being. And by doing so, I robbed him of his humanity. And I think this is an important thing to know, because we can get into these hierarchical structures where it's like leaders and employees and team members and founders, and they're all these different things, and it becomes, with a spark of unwellness, us versus them. And it's bullshit. It is total bullshit. We are all human beings. And in order to turn this cycle around, we have to be willing to step forward and be vulnerable and show our humanity. Because when you do that, people don't have a choice but to reflect their humanity back to you. And that's how we start to heal.
Tom?
So I'm particularly honored to be in this seat right here, because on the one hand, I have somebody who's really been willing to be honest and to be transformatively honest about experience in a context that hasn't been exposed, has been call it obscured, difficult to decipher or fully understand. And I think one of the things that happens when people can speak and do speak, and speak especially when it's counter to the prevailing norm, you do something that's atypical. There's this expression in Dune that Brad has shared before that I've always loved. It's the fear is the mind killer. By recognizing that and not letting fear become you, take over who you are and what you do, you really transform not just yourself but the situation that you're in. He's done this too. I mean, over and over and over again in ways that are really, really compelling and that I deeply respect. They're profound sorts of things, and they're not just related to this, but there are other ways that the prevailing norm, such as it is a locked-in sort of situation for many people, but doesn't have to be. You think it has to be, but it doesn't. And it takes someone who is willing to step outside that norm and say fuck. Not, by the way, for the shock value of fuck, but because in a moment and take this the right way, it doesn't fucking matter what you think of what I said. It matters more that I'm being free to say and be and do what I feel I need to do in a context. And if that happens, you'll hear me, not the version of me that I think you want to hear, right? And that's...
Or that we're told you're supposed to...
Precisely, yeah. And that's a transformative thing. I think it has been a transformative thing, and you really led the charge. You're leading a charge in this too, and I deeply, deeply respect that. And the other thing that happens is it starts to create a listening in the the norm, and it's like, wait a minute, that stands out. It's differentiated. And at first, sometimes the pushback or changeback message is, wait a minute, you can't do that. You can't. I had another venture capitalist friend once said to me in a conversation, this is many years ago, no one does this anymore, but they said, that Breadfeld, why does he have to say fuck? Why does he have to do that? And I loved that. I mean, I just love, I love all of it. So.
Well, I'd add, sort of reinforce a notion, and I think it links back to the original question, is that we are told by them, I'm not going to define who them is, right? But we are told by them how we are supposed to act and behave. And we are told by them how we're supposed to act and behave from a very early age. And them comes from lots of different places. And if you're an entrepreneur, by definition, the first thing you're doing, or one of the first things you're doing, is you're deciding not to listen to them about what you're supposed to do. It's the essence of creating something new. And to be a successful entrepreneur, you're going to have to keep doing that over and over and over again, because they are going to keep telling you, you can't do this, you shouldn't be able to do this, this won't work. And if you extend that on the functional side of being an entrepreneur, why can't you extend that on the emotional side of being an entrepreneur? And what happens, I think, and part of the thing that I see changing in 2016 is we're in a mode where entrepreneurship again is interesting, compelling, important. Often it's too trendy. The media has a good time glorifying it because that's what the media is supposed to do, right? The media's job is to either tell you how awful something is or how fantastic something is, with the hope that the awful thing will become fantastic so they can write about how the awful thing became fantastic or how the fantastic thing became awful. Like, that's what the media does. And if you know that, we all can kind of know that intellectually, but you still participate in the emotional response to it. Being an entrepreneur, creating something from nothing and doing it over a long period of time is extraordinarily hard. And having them tell you how to do it won't work. Being a human being, you know, I mean, independent of whether you think you're going to live long enough so that singularity happens, or, you know, the Elysium that I take every day will actually fix my telomeres. Or is just another way for me to waste $30 a month instead of wasting them at Pharmaca on vitamins that won't do anything for me. It's one or the other, I don't know. Regardless, like, you can have whatever your life philosophy is. Mine is, you know, we're all going to die, and between now and then we get to have an experience. Why should they tell me what that experience should be in the context of what I'm doing? That's not to say that there shouldn't be societal norms or laws or ways of behavior. Big container's good. I'm not talking about the big container. I'm talking about all of those things that we feel that pressure against.
Awesome.
I think here, just to add in here, one of the things that we really draw back to at Reboot a lot is Parker Palmer. Again, I call him the badass Quaker with my friend, because he's like this 70-year-old, if you're not familiar, 70-year-old Quaker man that writes these really beautiful philosophical books, and he's just amazing. I thought badass Quaker would get a laugh. Come on, guys. He talks about something called the tragic gap. And you should totally look it up and watch a video of him talking about it, because he does a far better explanation of it than I do. But the tragic gap, the basic idea of it is that when you are someone who is trying to do very hard things, whether that's changing the world through a company, or for someone like me, being happy all the time, there's where you are, and there's the ultimate goal. And we tend to have this focus, this beeline focus on this ultimate goal. But the problem is that when you have these huge end result outcome goals, and that's all that you're looking at, you're left with this huge gap in the middle. Because the fact of the matter is that most days, most of your life, if it even ever happens, you are not going to get to that point. And so you have to learn how to navigate this place in between. Otherwise, you will burn out. You will have depression or other things.
Thanks.
So, I am truly guilty of this. You are too, by the way. There are examples that we set because of how we behave and what we do that are phenomenal, but there are some things that are just who we are and how we operate that probably shouldn't be held out as the standard for other people. And you don't hold it out as the standard, but it's it's who you are and what you can do. And to the extent that that's sort of, to be successful, you must be able to do and be this, you can't do that. I have this thing. I'm not holding this out as a healthy thing. I'm not suggesting to any of you that you do this ever. But for a good chunk of my life, I was able to just skip a night of sleep a week. I just not do it. And I could work. And it's still true, though I slow down. The reason my speech is deeper right now and I'm talking more slowly is I actually did some of that because this week is a week from hell for me. There's a whole bunch of shit to do that isn't the stuff that I really do. I'm the founder and CEO of this thing called 10-10-10, and there's this program that's coming up in the near future, and I want it to go well, and there's just a ton of stuff that's required of me. But almost none of what happens this week has anything to do with that. So, and it still has to happen. But I can actually do that, and I'm willing to tax or sacrifice myself in that context. I do not recommend it. Don't do it. But I do it, and I don't mean to set that out as a standard for other people any more than I think you mean to prescribe as a standard that 4 hours a night of sleep, which has happened, or read faster than light speed, faster than most other humans. I mean, that's just not what it's about. So I just want to be clear about that piece of things too.
There is one set of standards and one set of norms that matters, and those are the ones that work for you. End of story.
Yep. So I think we should probably talk about tools to, what works for you. For me, it's being super immersed in a sport. Something, I don't know if you consider it sort of a tool versus a mindset, but Brad, you said you really, in general, start from the frame of reference that everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, I have many. My brain is an engineer's brain, so I have many tools. And if you've read the book that Amy and I wrote, Startup Life, there's a long list of things in that are tactics that we've evolved over time in our relationship to deal with the entrepreneur and the spouse of an entrepreneur or the partner of an entrepreneur. One of the things that I have done that links together a little bit that Tom was just saying is when I was depressed in my late 40s, so I had a 6-month depressive episode that started at the end of 2012 through pretty much the end of the second quarter 2013, that from one frame of reference came out of nowhere, and from another frame of reference when I was out of it and I sort of looked back at the previous year was very clear what led up to it. When I was out of the place where I was clinically depressed, I reevaluated a number of tactical things that I was doing, and I changed them. And so an example of one was that I was that guy who, no matter what time zone I was in, got up at 5 a.m. And I had a daily rhythm that, from 5 to 9, I did a certain set of things, which usually included exercise, but also included writing and email. And then from 9 to 6, I had a rhythm. And from 6 to when I went to bed, I had a rhythm, and there was time in that rhythm for non-work things, but there was a very consistent daily and then weekly rhythm. So my Monday to Friday looked a certain way with Saturday, Sunday, and then monthly rhythm and quarterly rhythm, et cetera. I completely broke that cycle. One of the ways I broke that cycle was I stopped using an alarm clock. So now I wake up whenever I wake up. And for the first 6 months of not using an alarm clock, I slept 12 hours a night. And my whole world changed because I was the one that woke up before Amy. So I'd wake up at 5 and she'd wake up at 6:30 every morning because that was when she naturally woke up without an alarm clock. And all of a sudden she's waking up at 6 or 6:30 and I'm waking up at 9, 9:30, 10. I'm not going to bed any later. I'm just asleep because I was just so at my core physiologically exhausted. Another example, so to Tom's point, sort of stepping back, especially as you reach different places in your life and think about what's going on, even the intellectualization of that is useful to explore. Like I think a lot of people around mindfulness struggle with how much should you your first, Jerry said a great thing to me, Kelowna, when he encouraged me for many years to meditate, try meditating. I'm a big runner. I always kind of rationalize that my running and meditating were the same. They're totally different activities. And I had started to meditate, and Jerry said, just remember it's called a practice because you're practicing. You're not trying to get an A. You're not trying to be at the top of the leaderboard. You're not trying to be better at it. You're not trying to do it every day and make sure you get it done every day. And that was very helpful. One of the other tools that sort of played into this cycle for me, and I'll describe an experience I had yesterday when I got depressed this last time. I did therapy when I was in my 20s for about 4 or 5 years very effectively. Finished that cycle. When I got depressed again, I started seeing a therapist here. I saw him once a week for a year. Now I see him about twice a month. And one of the things that comes up for me regularly is I know that boredom is a huge trigger for me. And I went to therapy yesterday and I said, okay, today was interesting. I don't feel like, I have something I want to work through. I was in a 5-hour board meeting that I wish didn't exist. Right? It wasn't a bad board meeting. I just didn't need to. I don't ever need to go to a board meeting again in my life. That would be okay with me. And I just spent five hours, in this thing. I didn't, there was 45 minutes of useful content and, 4 hours and 15 minutes of other. And I was aware that I was very bored, and I'm not uncomfortable. I'm not in a bad place. And we talked through it, and what came out of that, this is, again, the tool of using something like therapy for that. By the way, the reason I enjoy therapy, I basically call it a trip to Planet Brad. Like, I pay this person, he has to listen to me. He has no choice. If I want to talk for 50 minutes and not give him a chance to say anything back to me, he's still got to sit there because I'm paying him to sit there and listen to me. So it's awesome. I know, it's okay. I don't mind paying him, though. It's good, right? He gets to keep it confidential. This is on video somewhere. The end result of it, for me, one of the things that triggered my depression was essentially my feeling completely constrained by my routine that I was describing. And I have come to describe it as the wall of blue. Any of you that use an online calendar know what the wall of blue is, right? It's you look at your calendar and the entire thing is blue because that's the default color for some reason for Google Calendar and for Outlook, I think still. And so for 20-something years, when I bring up my weekly calendar, which is how I look at my calendar, there's a fucking wall of blue. And that is incredibly constraining to me. And I all of a sudden had a wall of blue in front of me. And the end result of this tool was I got very focused on the notion of obligation. So the times when I'm bored is when I feel an obligation, which I don't mind having an obligation, but it's an obligation that I know in advance I'm going to be bored of. And I don't do something about it, which is either change my frame of reference, so I engage with that obligation in an effective way, or decide not to do it, which I can do pretty much at this stage with almost everything. Not everybody can do that, right? But that's an example of the kind of tool. It's like this, in the language of Reboot, it's radical self-inquiry, it's continuous radical self-inquiry, and it's putting stuff in your life that allows you to have those touch points to explore however works for you, and to let that unfold over time. One last comment on this. I felt huge obligation in this relationship with my therapist, because I would oftentimes at the last minute, day before, have my schedule change and couldn't go see him. I went through a very intense period at the beginning of this year where I was traveling a lot. And I said, you know what? I'm going to pay you for every session, whether I come or not. So I'm just going to take that, the fact that if I don't show up, I'm inconveniencing you and your work. I'm just going to take it off the table. You have to listen to me. If I don't show up, you still get paid, so you can still just sit there and pretend like you're listening to me. And we still have the same contract. And if you want to use that time for something else, go for it if I don't show up. I give you permission. And all of a sudden, the obligation for me went away because I eliminated the thing that was causing me to feel anxiety and stress around it. I used a tool I had, which was money. Right? I was in the position where I could use that tool to eliminate that obligation. And that was incredibly freeing to me. So it's constantly look for those tools that give you the space to be able to live the way you want to live more effectively.
So two things, and these are really, really different sorts of things. I'm not sure they qualify as tools, but they're things that have proven interesting for me. And the first, I don't know what the analog is for this in other contexts, but I'm still a music guy. Just fundamentally a music guy, and somewhere along I was a guitar player, that's what I did. And somewhere along the path, my mother's curse struck, and my mother's curse was, Tom, you should learn to play the piano, and my pushback was, no, I won't, I'll learn clarinet, and I did that, and I did guitar, but didn't do piano. So my mother's curse is, suddenly at age 45, I'm smitten with the passion to play piano, and I gotta learn to do this. And so I bought a piano and taught myself to play, and I still teach myself to play, and I do it a lot. I love it. I could play piano for hours and hours and hours. Not because I'm good, by the way, but because there's an element of the struggle in it, and I can actually see improvement over time, and because even what I'm doing, mostly what I do when I do that isn't like practicing exercises or playing a classical piece, it's writing. So I'm writing a thing, as I'm doing it. So I feel like I get to create in a space that has nothing to do with startups, really, and that I'm not thinking about startups. I'm not thinking about 10-10-10. I'm not thinking about any of that. It's just... I'm in a zone.
It's your snowboarding.
Yeah, it's my snowboarding. Yeah.
He's immersed.
The other thing, and this is something that we learned and do in the 10-10-10 context that's kind of interesting, and it really is about the story about ourselves that we tell. So, I told the story at the beginning here. You did, right? And that's not the definitive story. It's a story, right? And startup CEOs do this, by the way. They tell stories about who they are. And it's kind of a manufactured story. It's the marketing story. It's the one that's supposed to work for them, oftentimes. And actually, if you were successful as an entrepreneur, you kind of get locked into it. It's this thing that you are and that you did and that made you what you are, and you tell that story over and over again. And, you depending on who you are, I'm great, or I'm not, or however you say it, but it's that thing that you get locked into. And for a lot of these folks in 10-10-10, they've had success before, and now they're going to come back and do something again, and they got to do something new, but that thing that they did is gone. So they kind of lost it. They don't any longer have the thing that they are telling the story about. So what we've asked them to do, what I asked them to do, is tell the story like they normally do the first time, and then a second time they'll tell the story, and I asked them to include the facts that they left out. So what are those pieces about you that you know and that you're connected to that actually might have meaning for you and that could even have meaning for your future and the life that you live that you're just not including? What are those things, and why are they missing? I think a little bit about why you left them out, and it's amazing what that does, by the way. I mean, people connect in a way that they wouldn't connect otherwise because the stuff that they left off the table for a reason, and when they bring it back in, interesting things happen. So that's just another piece.
Super powerful. Thanks for that.
Yeah, so listening to this and hearing lots of good things, I think for me, I have a set of tools and practical skills that help me to manage stress. These are things like swimming and running and taking time off, turning my phone off, a spiritual practice, which are all very helpful and healthy and part of like keeping me well. The other piece that's so important to me is actually diving into something that we call shadow. And your shadow is, and forgive me, this is all going to be according to the glossary of Sarah Jane, which sometimes is a little inappropriate. But it's, it's the place I stuff my shit, right? Everything that I don't like, all these thoughts that come up, it's where I stuff my shit, and then I churn that shit. And I'm like, people don't like me. I'm not good enough. I'm not well enough. You are really sucking at this panel. And when we say radical self-inquiry, which is part of our formula, the BET, as Jerry calls it at Reboot, we mean diving in and looking at this shit. And then diving in again and looking at this shit. And diving in again and looking at this shit. There's a story, and I'm at Naropa, and this is a Buddhist story, and I'm going to botch this so bad. But again, according to Sarah Jane, it's called Milarepa. And the story is that there is a man who is in a cave. And there are all of these fears that are popping up and looking at the man. And the man is trying all these different things to get rid of them. And I don't know, running, drinking, whatever we do, working more, checking our email. And more of them keep coming. And he's like, what the hell? There's all these people in the cave with me. It's getting louder and it's getting louder. He thinks about it. And he finally turns and he looks at them and he says, eat me if you wish. And the fears disappear. I am a 35-year-old part-time content manager, mother, who is petrified that I am not good enough and that I don't belong and that I don't have a place. Fuck that. Eat me if you wish.
All right. So with that, do we have some questions from the audience, please?
Brad, you just hit the nail on the head on something, I think.
You just-
You hit the nail on the head with something I think about a lot, and that is navigating the healthy space between obligation and accountability, and how to do that in a what I would call mentally healthy way. Can any of you guys talk about some of the solutions you've come up with?
Yeah, for me, I think you have to, I would assert you have to start with understanding yourself well enough to know how you deal with those issues to then figure out a path to successfully managing them. So here are some, from my frame of reference, things that then cause me to be able to handle it. The actual clinical diagnosis that I have is obsessive compulsive disorder. So when I'm anxious, I try to organize everything so that something unrelated doesn't go wrong. I try to make sure that every cigarette on the street of Massachusetts is perpendicular to the street so that my mother won't die. right? And it works, right? No linkage, but like step one of therapy for me in my 20s was figure out how to break that linkage. If I don't do the thing 3 times, I have to do it 9 times. And if I don't do it 9 times correctly, I have to do it 27 times. And if you have to do anything 27 times, you are going to get that right because you don't want to have to do it 81 times. Right? So sort of knowing that's piece 1. Piece 2, part of my first marriage failure was an inappropriate sense of responsibility for other people. My ex-wife, while we were getting divorced, was having difficulty with her new boyfriend who she had an affair with, and I was on the phone talking to her, helping her out, navigating this. The fuck is wrong with me? Right? Seriously, like why? And on, right? So like start with understanding yourself, and I won't give you the inside of my brain, some parts of it which are highly entertaining and other parts of it which are probably terrifying that you wouldn't want to wander around in. But understand that first. Then you have to overlay your context with it. At 25, when I was running my first company, and we had a successful company. I didn't have meaningful financial resources, but we had a successful company. So I wasn't up against the wall continuously. But I didn't have a network of people that I could talk to. I had a very small set of people I could engage with. And so I didn't have much choice in terms of that. When I was in my late 40s, not only did I have financial resources, I had a very strong network, including my 3 partners, where I could very consciously decide to change how I was interacting with everything else during a period of time. So you have to understand your context, and only then can you go to where you're going, which is against the backdrop of that context. You start thinking about what is it about this obligation, responsibility thing that is causing me to feel the way I feel. Personally, I could not have done that effectively without one more tool, which is psychotherapy. Like when I sit and think about it by myself, I come up with a long list of tactical things like cancel all the shit, which is not necessarily a productive response. Versus coming up with a frame of reference, which is, the problem is not that I have too much shit to do. I like doing this shit. I didn't, in advance of this session, I did not think I'm going to spend an hour and a half being bored, right? So this wasn't a difficult spot. I have another meeting today that in advance, I am quite aware that I will be bored. And I have lots of choices about what I want to do about that meeting. And I decided my revelation was too close to the meeting being last night to fundamentally change the meeting. But I can change the way I engage and enter into the meeting and how I am, how I take my seat in that meeting. If I hadn't thought about it, I would tell you that I would be 2 hours into that meeting and I'd be wanting to like pull my eyes out of my head and eat them just to make it end. Right? So it's all of those things together are linkages. And by the way, as somebody who's been through now, again, being 50, I'm not the super old man. It's totally weird. Like when I was 25, I was the youngest kid in the room all the time, and now I like keep referring to myself as old, and I feel like I'm 14. So there's a disconnect there, right? Your inner 14-year-old shines bright. But having been through it multiple times, I would also say it changes. It changes based on your circumstance, but it also changes based on your physiology as a human. You know, how I feel at 50 is very different than how I feel physically, emotionally, than when I was, 25. And that has to play into it too. There's plenty of things that are the same because it's your chemistry, but there is some of that chemistry that changes, and that chemistry, I think, is something that I would assert that many people don't let be true. Right? Your brain chemistry changes, your physical chemistry changes. I was 170 pounds when I was 25. Right? On a good day, I'm 200, and on a normal day, like today, I'm 215, and I run marathons. It'd be a whole lot fucking easier to run marathons if I was 170 pounds. And so I feel fat all the time. And, that's in my bag of shit. And I pull it out. And I don't worry too much about my self-image and my body image. I don't really care what I look like. I've never been somebody that people said, oh, yeah, he really works hard on his appearance. But as I'm running down the Boulder Creek path this morning and having a wonderful run, it crosses my mind that the run would be better if I didn't weigh that. And I stuffed that thought back in my bag of shit and said, I'm going to enjoy this run and not think about that right now.
I want to make sure we get to a handful more questions. Please jump in.
This doesn't respond as directly, maybe. There's a couple of little pieces to this. One is there are these, I can't always work on myself. I just can't.
Get bored.
It doesn't work for me. Well, and ineffective.
One of the things I want to do is work on myself.
Wildly ineffective too. But when it happens, I mean, when there's that conscious component of sort of figuring out who I am in a context and what that means and what I might do about it, the experience that I've had over a period of time is that there's kind of a step function transformation that occurs. It's bizarre almost. There's like this lift. And I'm not really sure it's because I've discovered some incredible thing or because just the work involved or whatever that is creates a capacity or new perspective or whatever. I don't know why it happens, but it seems to. That's just an observation over a period of time. And I find that if I'm going to do a new thing, and I haven't done that, I'm probably not going to be as effective as if I spent a little bit of time working on me before that. So, and I came to this realization far too late in life, right? If I'd understood this a long time ago, I'm sure things would have been much better, but I see that in hindsight. The other thing, and it really doesn't respond directly to the question, but it's just a powerful experience for me, and it goes back to that, okay, I'm the white kid in a ridiculously white Dutch Reformed community at the time, suddenly discovering himself in a black community and having to learn to speak differently. And so I had this experience again recently, and this is, this was close in time, and it was powerful for me, and it maybe can be powerful for others too. In their way of experiencing it. So this was like being a 17 again in a weird sort of way, and you'll kind of get it, I think. So I'm on a walk in Rhino in Denver, and as I'm walking, I hear some music coming from the Meadowlark, and the Meadowlark is a club where the Lumineers are discovered, and some of you'll know it, some of you won't, some of you won't care, but you go down into the basement and they tell you, yeah, you can get into this thing if you pay $10, but if you had the little or goodness button, you'd be able to get in free. It's like a club kind of thing. Go out onto the patio, and this is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And come to find out that this thing happens from 3 to 9 on a regular basis, and I walk into the space, and it fills up almost immediately, and probably 50% of the folks there are these extraordinary DJs from around Denver and around the country. So there are San Francisco DJs, there are LA DJs. The community is close, and there's a lot of mutual respect. You can see that these people have known each other for a long time, and it's like the in-crowd sort of thing. And then I sit on the side as I'm watching DJs do their thing, and the music is the most extraordinary thing I've heard in a long time. It's just absolutely amazing. I mean, it's powerful stuff. And pretty soon, 2 hours have gone, right? 3 hours, and I'm there, and I get up to go. And as I'm wandering out, a big guy blocks my path. And he's tattooed on this arm and tattooed on that arm, and he won't let me go. And he gives me this big hug.
I love this story.
He gives me this big hug, and he says, man, you're like Bernie Sanders. And I said, well, I kind of get why you say that, right? Because the closest.
Were you going like this?
I could. I could. But really, the next oldest person in that place, I'm 3 times that person's age. So it's easy to see why he might say that. But this perspective for me, this sort of being in an environment that isn't my normal environment and being taken out of that space and allowing it to transport me to a place that isn't the familiar, it actually took me back into being 17 in a way. It was extraordinarily powerful for me and amazing. So that kind of thing is I mean, I definitely wasn't fulfilling the obligation in that context. I was listening to the muse, and it just was really powerful and transformative for me.
Awesome.
So I just want to say at Reboot we have this BET, the BET, the formula I've been talking about. And it's practical skills plus peer support plus radical self-inquiry equals greater resiliency and enhanced leadership. And for me, and I think for a lot of our clients who are mostly CEOs or C-suite people, they feel very siloed. They feel very alone. They feel like they're the only person that feels the way that they do and struggles the way that they do. And that's where that peer group, that peer support group is so essential. And to me as an individual, there are so many things that I think I'm the only person that struggles with. And the way that I start to looking like maybe this doesn't have to be a struggle anymore is when I connect with other people who say, me too, right? And it dispels that anxiety. It helps to quell my fears, and I find a lot of comfort and a lot of power in that. And so, if you're a CEO or a leader, we have some things I could help you with. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, shameless self-plug. But if you're an individual, look for a community of your peers. And sometimes there isn't a community of your peers. And that is when you need to speak up so that your peers can find you, because they are looking for you. If you feel it, someone else feels it.
Well said. In the back, and briefly, Bill, how are we doing on time? And Mr. Feld, how are you doing on time?
I have to be back in my office at 1.
Okay. All right.
10, 15 more minutes.
Great. In the back.
Yeah, so just quickly, I'm an MBA student here at Leeds School of Business. In our first 2 weeks, we had a classmate drop out because of mental health issues. Nobody talks about it. It's not included in the curriculum anywhere. And as far as I know, there's no business schools across the nation that include it in their curriculum. So I wanted to ask you 3, do you have any ideas of how business schools could include it for undergraduate and graduate level curriculum?
So there are some schools that actually do include this, and Jerry has taught, is it at Columbia? I'm looking at my colleague here, and some other places. They could be teaching more places. I think that it's a matter of people asking, right? But I think that's what I have to say on that.
Business schools, entertainingly, are laggards in innovating on curriculum. And I think that's just a truism. I'm sure there are plenty of people that would debate that. I would assert that. And as a result, I think that the best way to impact it at CU Boulder or whatever business school or context you are in, it doesn't have to be a business school, it could be any academic environment, would be that it has to be bottom up. It has to be student driven. And the fact that no one's talking about it, the fact that it's uncomfortable, the fact that it's stigmatized, there is a low probability that anytime soon there will be any effort to address it in a constructive way, probably because of the stigma more broadly and the fear of addressing it by the people who would have to be motivated to do it. So the flip side of in terms of an administrative or a top-down phenomena. So, one of the things that I think is possible, it's it's kind of exactly this notion of find your peers, right? There are probably other people in your class that notice this and feel it's an important thing, and it's a topic worth exploring because of your colleague who very quickly dropped out because of mental health issues.
Okay, here, in the front, please.
Let's hear it. I guess in the spirit of give before you take, I'll give you an answer to a question you asked earlier, which is if we can, as entrepreneurs, innovate in the functional space and take great risks in the functional space, how come we can't do it in the emotional space? And the answer for me is that I work with a lot of really talented people, a lot of potential, and they've got a lot of options. And when we take risks in the functional space, there's things that they can do if stuff goes wrong. But if they're relying on me and I'm falling apart, they can't. They're much more limited in their ability. I need to compete for those people. And so if I am visibly falling apart, my ability to compete for them and hold them is very limited. And so Brad Bernthal asked me once, what do you do when you feel like you're falling apart? And my answer was simple: I bleed. There's just the people I rely on have enough options to where if I'm a weak link, they can go other places. And so I can't reveal that.
So I think that's really powerful and brave of you to say it the way you said it, so thank you, because I think it sets up the conversation. I think that probably is a set of feelings and a frame of reference that many founders and many leaders have. So thanks for articulating it so clearly. I would encourage the following thought process. Not necessarily to change the frame of reference, but to extend it, which is one of the underlying things to explore as a leader is what you want your cultural norms within your organization to be. I'm an extremely big believer that one of the things that is so awesome about being a founder and a leader is you get to have significant impact on the cultural norms of the organization you are leading. It's one of the reasons why people are entrepreneurs, is that they want to create a thing where the thing is not just the product, but also the company that is instantiated in a way they want, and a big part of that is cultural norm. If you think about the idea of competence and culture as the attributes of your employees, people that you're competing for to be part of your team, you need not just people who are high competence, but you need people who are high culture fit to your cultural norms, whatever they are. So you get to define them, and in the context of those cultural norms, you want people who are high fit with those cultural norms. If you have someone who's incredibly high competence, but they're very low culture fit, they won't work in a startup. And our natural tendency is, they're really competent, I can get them to change, or we can get them to fit in. And all they do is completely fuck up your cultural norms until you eventually fire them because they don't fit, and they're hard to fire because they're good at their work. And they're unhappy because they're in a context where their way of behavior doesn't fit the cultural norms. So the thing to think about to stretch, and you can do that at any stage of the company. There's a founder here in Boulder that runs a company in Denver, Full Contact, Bart Larang, who I think has been on one of the most extraordinary journeys of changing his cultural norm in his company as he grows and builds his company. And Full Contact of 4 years ago was a cultural norm that was much more militant, go take the hill, fraternity bro, show no weakness culture. And today it's a very positive, not extreme other end of the spectrum, so it's not a react to it, but it's an evolution which also reflects Bart's own evolution growing up from a single, younger but getting a little old, into his 30s, entrepreneur that is extrovert in everything, to a father happily married with a couple-year-old kid now, and instead of having a 3-person co-founding team that's going to take over the world, having a 100-person very successful business that's now growing to the next level. So it's not that any of this is easy, but that one of your opportunities as a leader is to put energy into changing the cultural norm so that you don't have to then continue to be the one that never shows any weakness. You may choose that that's not a cultural norm you want to change. You're like, nope, I got it, I can handle it. The right answer is I should be the one that carries that around with you. And by the way, there are leaders who are very effective who do that. So it's not saying that that can't work either. That's the cultural norm. The question you have to ask, and this was me in my first company, was after about 6 years of that, including the inappropriate responsibility for everything that went wrong, I couldn't do it anymore. I literally broke. So it wasn't that I was breaking, it was that one day I just broke. And if I had only had that happen once in my life, there would be no pattern, but I've had that happen several times in my life. And what I realized after it happened several times in my life was that my behavior and my own internal norm, the way I approached it, there were some things that were so glitchy in my expectation set that caused me not to be able to be sustainable over a period of time. So I put that out there. I hope that's helpful. Again, I think your frame of reference, your starting point, was so clear. I felt that in my 20s. I think so many leaders feel exactly what you just said because we are told the leader has to be strong, the leader can't show weakness. And as a leader, our fear is the second we show weakness, all our employees are going to quit. And that's not something you change in a day. You get up in front of everybody and say, we've changed. Now we all get to talk about, our feelings. But you can adjust and impact over a period of time. Yeah.
Yep, and we have probably time for one, maybe two, and they should probably be the most burning questions. So yep.
Oh, can I say something very quickly? I just want to say, so I know Bart. We're actually friends. Our children are the same age, and 4 years ago, Bart was not someone that I was interested in having a relationship with. He was not a guy that I would want to hang out with. And I believe that Bart has dove in, I don't know what the word is,
Dived.
to looking at who he really is, to owning his shit, to being a full and present human being, and took his seat as a leader, as a human being, making a company that's for other human beings. And from my seat, I really enjoy interacting with him now. We're good friends with him and his wife, and our kids are friends. And I appreciate, on a friendship level and a person level, the work that he's done.
Yeah. Thank you.
I just wanted to offer a few resources to the group.
We have a microphone over here, please.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you bringing this, being vulnerable and bringing this conversation to this space. 2 resources. One is a nonprofit that was founded in 1981 because of a college student that went to school early and committed suicide, and that's supporting emotional needs of the gifted. Whether you like that term or not, it's initially where the research was housed within education and psychology. But the organization cares for entrepreneurs, change makers, innovators, people like yourselves, cognitive sometimes outliers, sensitive empaths, lots of good resources out there. And another is 6 Seconds Emotional Intelligence Network, which, as human beings, it's like the unseen, right? We can't always see someone's emotional development. So you're speaking to culture and competence. Well, they're one and also the same because emotional competence deeply affects culture. And if you look at the skills composed within emotional intelligence, we're not always good at predicting it. We confound oftentimes extroversion, charisma, and likability with emotional development. So great tools and resources. And so as entrepreneurs, just some other ways to cross industries, wanted to offer those out to folks and remind too, is this is my life calling and my work in supporting, I support some of these organizations. But even those with high emotional development, brilliant people can still be impacted by trauma, and a variety. And trauma really can, it's the cycle of violence you're speaking to that can be associated with a variety of mental health diagnoses, whether it's anxiety, depression, ADHD, bipolar, so on and so forth. So just remind of that too. I walked that journey of healing and embrace feeling the pain too, and that pain is when that pain moves through you, you're going to look crazy, and that's just people people judge as they will, but the healthy thing to do is to look crazy and let it move through you, because if you don't, it's the suffering and it will repeat the cycle of violence. So thank you for sharing.
Thanks. So last question, and then I have a few announcements. Bill has a few announcements, and then I think we have a photographer here as well that wants to talk to the panelists briefly. So ready, set, go.
Thanks. So just to kind of play off of what you said and what you guys have all been saying, I'm extremely passionate about my company, and that's because of some traumatic experiences that have happened to me in my childhood. So I've got the way I describe it to people, which is as a strong leader and the way I think I should describe it. How do I start to bring in the real me and the real reason into that conversation without appearing weak and letting that pain affect me in that conversation, and without freaking the other person out?
There's a founder locally who I think is doing an extraordinary job of this with her company, and I'm happy to make an intro. Just send a note to brad@feld.com, and if we didn't get to questions and people want to go back and forth on email, I'm happy to. And the woman is Jacqueline Ross, who has a company called Revelar, and Revelar is a device that's a safety device that you carry around with you, and you press it twice, and it's a yellow alert broadcasts out to people that you set, and if you click it 3 times, it's red alert that people need to come help you immediately. And it came out of her younger sister being sexually assaulted twice, and her desire to, and her own sense of feeling, she's a attractive young woman, she's small, right? Her own feeling of physical safety that's exacerbated by the fact that your younger sister gets assaulted, right? I mean, that's primal, and so that's incorporated into her point of view. Her business is a very serious business, building a product, and her discussion about the need for the product is a very clear one. But she's also very good at not getting tangled up in the emotion of what happened as the instantiation for what's going on. It's the story arc that led to the creation of the product. It's the essence of the fabric of the company that they're building these products to enable not just young women who feel threatened, but anyone who has ever felt threatened or could anticipate being in a situation where they feel threatened, ... right? So it's like she's navigating that really well, and I think she'd be a good person to just have a long conversation about, because she'll have some insights there.
I would love that.
Anybody else? Sarah Jane, I imagine you probably are open to giving out your email as well.
Oh, of course. And I was just going to say another founder that you should look at is Tracy Lawrence of Choose, CHEWSE. She has a really powerful story of being teased horribly as a kid and having to eat lunch on her own. And she founded this beautiful company that does healthy and really just wonderful catered lunches for teens, and has a whole philosophy of how she's approaching the company, calling it a love company, because she wants to actually create the kind of environment that she was left out of when she was a kid for her employees. She's amazing.
Okay.
Thanks. So we talk about, do we want to allow ourselves to say, hey, as a leader, I'm feeling weak or something like that. I think one thing that we can do as leaders is to say, hey, here's what I need to be strong today. So I need to take an afternoon off, or you need to go scuba diving, because I've sent guys like, hey, go surfing for the day out in Santa Cruz. So it's sort of flipping around and saying, you're showing that you need something, but you're showing what you need to be strong, and that is empowering, I think. So thank you.
And I'm terribly sorry. I think we need to move forward. A big hand for these folks. And a couple words, just in summary: be vulnerable, be honest, be authentic, breathe, ask for help, immerse in something you love, find a peer group, know you're not alone. Thank you to the Boulder Startup Week sponsors. Thank you to Naropa. Bill, you want to say a few words real quick?
everybody. I'm Bill Rigler. I'm the Director of University Relations here at Naropa. On behalf of Naropa's President Chuck Leaf and our Board Chair Jerry Colonna, just wanted to thank Dave, Brad, Tom, and Sarah Jane. There was a question that was just asked about some tools and workshops. On your chair, you'll see a flyer for an Authentic Leadership Center event that's hosted here out of Naropa that will provide just that, and we also have some spectacular discounts for Boulder Startup Week participants. And as a closing, I just wanted to lead you through a voluntary practice that we do here at Naropa called the Naropa Bow, which is a way that we both begin and end all of our meetings, and it's a way to fully presence ourselves in the meetings, and it's pretty simple, and again, you're welcome to join. But basically, I would ask you just to sit up straight, put your hands on your lap, close your eyes, take a deep breath in, exhale. One more time, and then bow. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.